Good evening, good evening. You can all sit down. Good evening and assalamu alaikum. My name is Muhammad Usman Faridi, and I am the president of the New York City Bar Association. And it is an honor for me to welcome all of you to our association tonight. First, a few words about our association for those who don't know about it. I see a lot of new faces here tonight. We were founded in 1874, about 154 years ago, and we are one of the largest voluntary bar associations in America. We are about 23,000 members strong, and we have a dynamic and diverse group of members who include some of the leading practitioners, judges, academics, and law students from the New York City area, but also abroad. And our mission is to equip and mobilize the legal profession to practice with excellence, to promote the reform of law, and uphold the rule of law and access to justice in support of a fair and equitable society here in New York City, throughout our nation, as well as throughout the world. And consistent with our mission, it is quite an honor for us tonight to host Justice Athar Minallah from the Supreme Court of Pakistan. Justice Minallah will have what I will expect will be a very illuminating and interesting conversation with my colleague, Kabir Hashmi from Patterson, Belknap, who himself clerked for another justice on the Pakistani Supreme Court before coming to the United States to get his LLM. And he's one of my colleagues at Patterson Belknap, where we work together. And I will let Kabir give a more proper introduction of Justice Minallah, but what I will say very briefly is that in the last couple of days, I've had an opportunity to shadow Justice Minallah as he's visited the various courthouses in New York. He's met with a number of judges from our courts, including Judge Elizabeth Strong from the Eastern District of New York, Judge Jenny Rivera from the New York Court of Appeals, and Chief Judge Rowan Wilson from the New York Court of Appeals. And I will tell you that just from listening in on those conversations, it's been quite a treat for me. And there's one thing that became readily apparent to me from those conversations, that Justice Minallah's love for his country, for his colleagues on the bench, that's a paramount thing for him. And most importantly, he has a commitment and dedication to the rule of law. Now I have the privilege of welcoming Chief Judge Rowan Wilson from the New York Court of Appeals, the highest court in our state. The Chief Judge will say a few welcoming remarks before we turn the podium over to Kabir and Justice Minallah.
Assalamu alaikum, good evening. Thank you, President Faridi. It's really a great privilege for me to be here with you this evening and to welcome Justice Minallah to New York. It isn't his first time here. And I had the great pleasure of spending about an hour or so with him this afternoon. He's really a wonderful man and a wonderful jurist. When Justice Kahn, who chairs the association's Rule of Law Committee, asked me to attend and to perhaps give some introductory remarks, I was under the impression that she asked me to do so because both Justice Minallah and I have written about elephants. And I have to say, he was a lot more successful in that regard than I was. His majority opinion holding that an elephant had rights that were enforceable under the rule of law was met with worldwide admiration. And my dissent in the Happy the Elephant case produced a huge number of headlines in papers, mostly in the United States, that read, "Court holds elephant, not a person." But on reading the flyer inviting all of you here and learning a bit more about Justice Minallah, I realized that his presence here has really nothing to do with elephants and everything to do with the independence of the judiciary. From the flyer, you can see that in 2007, this association held a huge rally in front of 60 Center Street to support the independence of the judiciary in Pakistan at a time when President Musharraf had removed Pakistan's Chief Justice, Justice Chaudhry, placed him and his family, including young children, under house arrest and suspended the Pakistani constitution. A year later, when Justice Chaudhry, Chief Justice Chaudhry, was able to come to the United States, the association bestowed an honorary membership on him in recognition of his sacrifices to maintain the rule of law in Pakistan. So just a few months ago, 6 judges of the Islamabad High Court wrote a letter accusing the Pakistani security forces of interfering with judicial decision-making by secret surveillance of judges in their homes, by torture and murder and threats to relatives of the judiciary. In May, the Pakistan Supreme Court heard arguments concerning the charges, and Justice Minallah is today involved in the same efforts to protect and ensure the independence of the judiciary that Chief Judge Chaudhry was nearly 2 decades ago. Even here in the United States, and I think all of you know this, we are facing increasing threats to the independence of the judiciary as certain members of the public, sometimes quite famous ones, are emboldened to attack judges verbally, and others translate that into a license to attack judges physically, including by, in some instances, murdering them. We don't face the level of threat to the rule of law that Pakistan faces, but it's the same in concept. We all need to fight those threats to judicial independence in whatever form they take, regardless of their source, both to maintain the rule of law here and to remain able to set a standard for others around the world and to aid them as we have done in the past. So it gives me great pleasure then to turn the program over to Justice Minallah to hear his words of wisdom. I had a private audience where I learned a tremendous amount about a variety of subjects relating from the rule of law to tolerance to history to religion. I hope I can remember even half of what I learned over that hour. And to get a little bit of inspiration from him for all of us as we strive to defend the rule of law. And if he happens to stray a bit into relevance, you won't hear a complaint from me.
It is now my great pleasure and honor to welcome Justice Minallah. Please, Justice Minallah and Kabir Hashmi can come to the podium.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Assalamu alaikum, Justice Minallah. Welcome to New York and to the New York City Bar Association. It is an honor and a pleasure, and I feel lucky to be the one to speak to you tonight. I don't want to be the one who talks about your background because I want you to tell the audience. So could you tell us a little bit about your early life, where you grew up, your parents, and please?
Thank you very much, Kabir. At the very outset, I would like to extend my profound gratitude to the President and his colleagues and the members of this very prestigious and one of the oldest bars. And let me share with you that I had no intention of accepting any invitation. But when I received the letter and I saw the name, then I inquired. I was told that this is one of the youngest member of the bar who has been elected, as president of this bar. And I found out that his links with Pakistan and with Sialkot. So I am here today, Mr. President, to give you this recognition that the tremendous achievement you have made in this short time, it's an honor and a privilege for me, and on behalf of my people, I congratulate you. But let me also acknowledge that this great city and this country gave you that opportunity to display your talents and to achieve what very few would have been able to achieve. So that in itself is a recognition of this society, its values of democracy, equality, and social justice. And that is why you are here, you have reached this position. So Kabir asked me about my childhood. I was very, very fortunate. Very fortunate I was born in a house. My parents were one of the ideal parents that one can have. My father was part of the most elitist service then in the country. It was the ruling class of that time. That was the civil service of Pakistan, and they were known as CSPs, the successors of the Indian civil service. And unfortunately, since from the very early time, constitutionalism in Pakistan could not progress because of interventions by those who had no right to govern the country. But even amongst those elitist classes, my father was a very different kind of a person. He was a people's man. He died at a young age, at the age of 48, met a road accident. But by that time, he had served in 2 provinces as the chief secretary and also as a federal secretary, which is a very rare distinction. But what makes him different to all others who have served at that time, a civil servant or a bureaucrat is never remembered by name. Wherever he served, even today, after more than 40 years of his death, he is remembered and respected because he didn't conduct himself as a ruler. He knew that he was a civil servant. He had to serve them as civil servant. And in particular, I mean, though he's my father, but this is something which is very important for me because it gives me great pride. He served in Balochistan. Today, after more than 40 years, whenever I go to Balochistan, every person tells me that you are son of our benefactor, and that is my pride, and that is what I value. Similarly, my mother was a very, very dynamic, and she was a leader. And when my father died, she was the one who brought us up. And if today I am given a chance, that what at that time, if you had an option, that one of your parents had to be taken, who would you opt for? I would have said, my mother wanted. I would want my mother to take care of us. So, because of my father being in the civil service, I was born in Chitral, one of the remotest places in the Northwest Frontier Province. I studied in various schools in very far-flung areas as well. I studied in North Waziristan, I studied in Zob, I studied in Gilgit, I studied in Peshawar, I studied in Lahore, and ultimately ended up in Islamabad. So I was fortunate, you see, because I was exposed to the real Pakistan and also in Quetta. So I'm very fortunate that I had a wonderful childhood, and I learned a lot because of studying and getting to know so many people in such different, diverse areas. So that is what I am, and whatever I am today, I am only and only because of my mother.
Absolutely. When I was researching for this talk, I learned that your mother was a member of parliament and that your father had exhibited opposition to the 1977 martial law, and he was removed from office because of that. Could you speak a little to that and tell us what that was?
Well, fortunately, that opportunity could not be availed by the then usurper, General Ziaul Haq. But the differences between my father and him, they started when my Zulfikar Ali Bhutto had imprisoned Baloch leaders. So after a while, he realized his mistake, and he wanted to mend the ways with them. But he wanted a way out of that. So he selected my father. He had trust in my father's abilities as an administrator. So the first condition that my father placed before him was that he would only go to Balochistan if he can assure him that there would be no interference in his work. So that is when, and this is something, a matter of record, because Zulfikar Ali Bhutto mentioned this in one of his applications filed in the Supreme Court, that he convened a meeting with my father and General Ziaul Haq. That didn't go well, but General Ziaul Haq had no option but to succumb to what Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, the then Prime Minister, decided. So his grievance was that he could not interfere in the affairs of Balochistan as long as my father served there, and that is why the people of that province still today remember him, and I feel proud of that.
No, absolutely, it's something to be very, very proud of. I can only imagine the impact that such a strong person can have on your mind and on your view towards the law and the rule of law. So when did you read law? When did you get into the legal profession and studied for it?
Well, from the very beginning, I was passionate about the profession. I don't know, probably because of my uncle, who was a judge of the Supreme Court, and he was one of the judges who was on the bench that decided Zulfikar Ali Bhutto's case, and he was the one of the 3 dissenting judges. And then he was hounded out of the country. Probably he inspired me, but from the very beginning I was passionate about the profession of law. But when I did my law, my father had passed away. So probably I looked for a shortcut and took my civil services exam, but I couldn't find that service according to my temperament. So I resigned and then rejoined the legal profession.
And is it before that you read law at Cambridge, or was it afterwards?
No, when I was in service, that was also part of it. I got this scholarship, Chevening scholarship, and fortunately I also got admission at Cambridge. So I read it at Cambridge, and then I resigned from the civil service.
Right. Well, we're lucky to have you in the legal profession. Can you tell us, as a young advocate, you've just come back from Cambridge, and you want to start your own practice, what was the state of the country at the time?
No, when I came back, there was an elected government, and things were somewhat stable. There was democracy, but I think I was very, very fortunate because such an opportunity very rarely someone gets, because 2 of my closest friends, they were already in the law practice, and we 3 of us, we formed a firm, and it's probably a rare thing that has happened. All three of us were later elevated as High Court judges. All three of us served different high courts, and now all three of us, we are in the Supreme Court.
Absolutely, it is remarkable. It is remarkable. It is something that all lawyers in Pakistan talk about, especially the name of the firm was Faridi, Minallah, and now that is the justices of the Supreme Court in Pakistan. And two of them are going to be Chief Justice one day, which is just absolutely remarkable. But during your legal practice, you've lived through times when there were elected governments and when there was dictatorship. Can you talk about how your overview of constitutionalism, your outlook towards the law would change in those different regimes?
That's a very interesting question, you see. On 12th of October 1999, the elected Prime Minister was removed. The Parliament was dissolved, which couldn't have been dissolved, not at least by the Chief of Army Staff. And it was martial law that was imposed. So it was very, very disturbing. That was a time that when I decided not to practice. But after a few months, since the unconstitutional act had to be legitimized and the assistance of the Supreme Court was required. So as it was happening in the past, they issued a martial law ordinance whereby the judges were required to take an oath of allegiance to the chief executive. That was General Musharraf. So that morning, I read in the newspaper, I mean, this is an interesting aspect of my life. So I was quite surprised that how can a judge who's already taken an oath to uphold, defend, and protect the Constitution now take another oath? That, to my mind, was one of the biggest misconduct on part of a judge. So in the morning, I didn't think about it. I just took a paper and a handwritten application I made addressed to the judges, asking them that under 184 of the Constitution, you entertain this petition and that you cannot take another oath. My driver hadn't arrived as yet, so I took the car, I went to the Supreme Court. Then I was not a lawyer of the Supreme Court. I had difficulty in finding the place where the judges sit, their chambers. Ultimately, I reached there. So I saw a few judges going out. So I stood there, and they were also very surprised that why is a lawyer standing there? So the person who then later was to take the oath as Chief Justice, he asked me, why are you here? I said, I have a petition and I have a grievance. So he said, what is the grievance? I said, my grievance is that you have taken an oath, and now you cannot take another oath. So somehow, you see, they got worried. They thought that probably it's not alone. Other lawyers would be coming, and they rushed outside, sat in the cars, and they went away to the President House to be administered that new oath. So the additional registrar came back, and he asked me, what have you done? So I said, no, 5 other judges should have been there. So he said, no, they are not taking oath. So I said, where are they? So he said that they are in Justice Nasir Aslam Zayed's chamber. I went up, And there, these 5 judges, honorable judges, independent judges, who had refused to take that second oath, they were there. So I sent in the petition, they asked me, the person came out and he said that they are saying, go and register it with the registrar. I said, no, I want a hearing. So they allowed me to come in. So there is 5, and out of those 5, right now 2 are alive. Justice Wajiuddin is alive, and Justice Nasir Aslam Zayed is alive. So well, I argued my case. So I said, we do appreciate, but we have already decided not to take the oath. So they did not entertain my petition. It was their prerogative. Later, during the lawyers' movement, one of them, Justice Wajiuddin, he told me that he regretted why we had not granted an injunction then. So I thought that I'd done my bit. I had tried my best. I went out. There was no protest. And the next day, everyone started appearing before the same judges who had taken the second oath. And I felt that since everyone has accepted it, so I also joined them. But when I look back today, I think that was an unprincipled thing to have done, even as a lawyer. So that is how, you see, I experienced that period. Yes, it's a very, Chief Judge, with your permission, if you don't mind, if you recall, when George W. Bush in 2005, in his inaugural speech, he made a declaration. He made a declaration that the United States would support democratic movements around the world, and that they would not support any oppressor, nor they would ignore any oppressor, and that they would not forgive any oppressor. But when, I can't blame anyone, because every nation has its own priorities and national interests, but probably George W. Bush forgot about his declaration and gave a red carpet treatment to General Pervez Musharraf, and things then changed. And that also changed. You see, the reason why I'm saying this is that the people of Pakistan are extremely resilient. They have struggled, they have resisted unconstitutionalism, they have resisted authoritarian rules for the last 76 years. But it becomes more difficult for them. It becomes more challenging when the outside world endorses the unconstitutional authoritarian regimes in these countries in the developing world. It only makes it difficult for them.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Looks like you started your own lawyers' movement before the actual lawyers' movement, though. But I want to
in between, let me confess, I made a mistake.
No,
As
but I still think you caused a bit of movement, though.
No, after that, you see, probably I saw, since the Supreme Court then also gave a judgment, everyone accepted it, all the bar associations accepted it, everyone started appearing before the same court. I also started appearing before the same courts, which was wrong thing to do. But then, just before the elections, for 5 months, the governor of the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa offered me to join his cabinet as a caretaker government. Those 5 months probably changed my life. And that regret or that blemish, at least the lesson that I learned from that was that no, enough is enough. There has to be a zero tolerance. And there has to be a commitment to the Constitution, no matter what happens.
Absolutely.
So it was that commitment that changed my life. And then after that, I joined the lawyers' movement, and then my life was different.
And this is a great segue into the lawyers' movement. Can you tell us a little bit about what your role was in the lawyers' movement? What was going on, how you became involved, and what happened?
This is very interesting. The way Chief Justice Chaudhry used to conduct the court before the lawyers' movement, somehow I was critical of that. I had no contact with him, I didn't know him. And on the 9th of March, since there was a very prolonged authoritarian rule of Pervez Musharraf, so on 9th of March, when the Chief Justice was detained in the Army House, and then he was suspended, not only suspended, for me, it was not Iftikhar Mohammad Chaudhry. For me, it was that constitutional office of the Chief Justice. It was the question of independence of judiciary. It was not the individual. And I felt bad. And I said, as I'd learned a lesson in my life, so I didn't know what to do. The lawyer organization took 2 days to take the decision. But the same evening, I wanted to register my protest. The Chief Justice was brought back to his house and detained there by the law enforcement agencies. For me, again, it was not the individual. It was the institution, it was the independence of judiciary that was undermined in such a blatant, unconstitutional manner. So that night, I didn't know what to do. So I probably had thought of doing something very drastic. So I have a mentor in my life who was one of my partners, my very dear friend, and who's in the Supreme Court, Justice Faridi. So he knew that I'm going to do something drastic. So he said, no, what you should do is file a petition, and I'll also be one of the petitioners. So I filed that evening, on 9th of March, a petition of habeas corpus. And it is paradoxical, because if you go through my petition, it says to the Supreme Court that your Chief Justice is in illegal detention in the colony where all the judges reside, and I need a writ of habeas corpus. And our lawyer was our third partner, Justice Mansoor Ali Shah. So that petition, first I went, they were not entertaining. On the 10th of March, and I was all alone. I tried my best. Then I really asked them that I want to see the acting Chief Justice. So the registrar gave it back to me with 12 objections. So we had to file an appeal. That appeal was never fixed, and that petition was never taken up by the Supreme Court. And the most strange thing was that this was a petition for the Chief Justice of Pakistan, who was detained by the law enforcing authority within the Supreme Court judicial colony, and all the judges could see the premises from their residences as well. But that petition, he remained in that illegal detention till the 16th of March, but it was never taken up. So that is where I started I was not in the lawyers, I'd never participated in the bar politics, this was, I thought it was my duty as a lawyer to take up the issue because it was the issue of independence of judiciary. And that is how I joined, and then somehow Chief Justice Athar Chaudhry, he sent a message to me, but that I will leave for my memoirs, would not disclose it now.
I'm sure he's very grateful. But for those in the audience that don't know that time and don't know about the lawyers' movement, it was a very dark period in Pakistan's history. Although it was supposed to be a peaceful protest, many lawyers lost their lives. So, Justice Minallah, didn't you fear for your life?
Well, you see, I don't know. When I look back, and even at that time, I was optimistic. And why I was optimistic? It was a movement of the people, those people who we call them the have-nots, who have no access to justice, who cannot afford justice, and who have always yearned for rule of law. But it was, the most optimistic aspect was that it was a movement of young lawyers and the young people. And I saw students from Harvard taking leave only to be part of that movement. I saw the idealism of the youth of Pakistan. And I saw that change in Pakistan for the first time. And as you said, 90 people lost their lives in that movement. They sacrificed their lives. Many were arrested. And again, I would say very fortunately that I was arrested as well and spent some very memorable and good time in the overcrowded prison of Adiala. But that gave me an opportunity to see for myself. Now, when I was the Chief Justice, I received a letter from one of the inmates of Adiala prison explaining to me the horrific conditions within the prison to which I myself was a witness. So I converted his petition into a constitutional petition, and then rendered a judgment on the rights of the prisoners and what their rights were and what were the duties. And that also then gave me an opportunity to visit Adiala prison along with all my judges several times. So yes, the lawyers' movement was a great movement, but it never ended there. Let me admit that after restoration, the restored judiciary let down those young people. The jurisprudence that developed after that was not the jurisprudence which was in conformity with the goals of that lawyers' movement. That lawyers' movement was not for the restoration of judges or the Chief Justice. It was a movement for restoration of the Constitution and the principles of democracy, freedom, equality, and social justice that are embedded in that Constitution. But what happened after that? Let me confess, the Memogate case was not a case which should have been taken up by the Supreme Court. It was encroachment upon the domain of the executive. One of our ambassadors, a dignitary, was declared by the Supreme Court as a traitor. I think that was not in the interest of the country. Again, an elected prime minister was disqualified from his office. That was not the function of the Supreme Court. So many elected representatives were disqualified under Article 62(1)(f). That was not the function of the Supreme Court. And that was not fair to those 90 people who had sacrificed their lives. It was not fair to all those thousands of young people imbued with idealism who had sacrificed their day and night. The Supreme Court and the judiciary was not fair to them as well.
Well, it's a pleasure and honor to hear somebody being this honest. This is something we hear in the news and we talk about it, but it's just, the honesty is just really remarkable and really captivating. But I will get to all of that in a second. Now I want to move to a happier topic. And there's as Judge Wilson mentioned, there's an elephant in the room. And I want the audience to know this story about this very happy elephant which is now in Cambodia, I believe, because of you. Can you please tell us the story of the elephant and what happened there?
It's very interesting because in the Islamabad High Court, I don't take credit for that, but I give the credit to my judges that were elevated, that Islamabad High Court emerged as an independent court. So, as an independent court, I don't know why all the petitions started ending up there. Petitions regarding violation of fundamental rights, enforced disappearances, right to dignity. And while I was dealing with these very serious issues, one unsung hero, a medical practitioner, brought in a petition praying that the conditions of an elephant in the zoo that was Kahn be improved. He didn't have, probably could not afford a good lawyer, but he had a young lawyer, very energetic. And then there was another petition regarding a bear, and the zoo was refusing to shift it, allow it to be shifted to a sanctuary. And a third petition, a lady brought a third petition regarding the treatment of stray dogs. So this was amidst those very serious issues. But then when the proceedings started, I felt this was equally important. It was not just that one elephant. And the story of the elephant was extremely interesting because you can draw parallels with the human rights violations. The usurper, General Ziaul Haq, at the very height of his authoritarian rule, his daughter wished to have a baby elephant. So General Muhammad Ziaul Haq asked the president of Sri Lanka that my daughter wishes to have a baby elephant. Now, elephants are very, very intelligent social beings, and they have emotions, very strong emotions. They grieve and they rejoice. They celebrate the birth of a baby, and it's a very matriarch kind of a family, you see. So this 1-year-old Kahn, then he was not named Kahn, but a baby, was kidnapped by a state to be offered or gifted to another state. So to me, it looked like it was a case of enforced disappearance. Now, it didn't end there. He was flown to Pakistan For a while, he was kept in the backyard of General Ziaul-Haq's house. And then when he was growing up, they thought, you see, now he is going to become big. Let us now, he can't stay here in the house. Let us shift him to the... So the zoo was established for him. But then there was no one there to look after him. There were no expertise. So they all brought in other animals. Like, for instance, the Himalayan bears. Imagine bears from Himalaya. The nature has created a habitat for these bears in those highest plateaus. They were brought to Islamabad. I mean, even for them, the winters were unbearable, and nobody looked after them. The marsh crocodile was not an animal species which should have been there in Islamabad. So I didn't know what to do. I thought, you see, this is as serious as the human rights violation. So, and I looked at the prayers that were sought. I said, even the prayers are not the way I'm looking at it. So what I did was I appointed the Worldwide Fund, Pakistan, as an amicus. To my shock and horror, the amicus brief that they submitted, they said, well, we can improve the conditions. So for me, there was a very, very different kind of thing that, I mean, it was bothering me. Why it was bothering me? I'd read about Otabanga, I'd read about Sergei Batman, and I hope you all must be knowing about Otabanga. Not very long ago, only in 1906, Otabanga was a Congolese native. He was brought here in the United States, and he was placed in the zoological gardens, which is also known as the Bronx Zoo. And he was then caged along with the monkeys as a human exhibit. What happened with him? I mean, imagine there was a time when humans treated humans as non-human animals. That Otabanga wanted to go back. So some very noble missionaries, they campaigned for Otabanga. He got the release, and he was longing to go back to his native place where nature had given him birth. But then the World War started, he couldn't go back, and he ultimately took his life. Likewise, Sergei Batman was a South African. She was abducted from South Africa and taken to London to be displayed as a human exhibit. From 1800 till 1950, there were human zoos across Europe up to New York. And imagine, today, the seat of human rights, Geneva, also not very long ago, hosted human zoos. So that is what we have been doing to humans. In this very great country, there was a time when humans could not travel together in the same bus. They could not study together. So, I mean, that troubled me. I said, how can these are also non-human breathing beings? They have to have their rights. But then I looked around all the jurisprudence of the world. There was no jurisprudence which recognized their rights, except very limited extent in Argentina and Ecuador. But that too at a very extent. So my colleague, I discussed with him, he said, again, you see, my fellow brother judge, so he said, are you mad? Are you going to shut down the zoo? What are children and grandchildren going to do? So I said, why not put our children and grandchildren in these cages and allow people, let them be exhibits as well. And imagine what happens to an animal in the zoo when outside people are staring at him, at that animal species. That is violation of that animal right and animal being's right to dignity as well. So I had to find a way out. So then I realized that when the United Nations Declaration for Human Rights was being drafted, I wanted to know, how did they come with this idea that humans have rights? Do they have rights only because they are humans? Or is there some other intrinsic value which gives them those rights? So I realized that a dead human does not have rights. So why does a living human, a breathing human, whether that's an infant or a comatose or any person on a ventilator, why do they have? So there was another very big difficulty. I read about the jurisprudence. With great respect, the Chief Justice, though he dissented, was about Happy the elephant in Bronx Zoo. And that was the time when I'd almost completed my proceedings. The Supreme Court of New York dismissed Happy's petition. It dismissed Happy's petition on two grounds. One ground was that it cannot bear legal rights, and it cannot be accountable for its acts. And the second ground was that since it cannot do that, it's not a person. And the personhood, you see, though the judges were extremely sympathetic towards it. So then I realized why humans have human rights. That factor attribute that has the intrinsic value which needs to be protected is that life, and life alone, which gives rise to all these rights. So then, that attribute, that intrinsic value is also there in case of the non-human animals. So then, again, you see, there was a difficulty. The Supreme Court of New York, since they said we can't grant a habeas because it's not a person, so that was again a difficulty for me. And that was the correct approach, because even in our Constitution, then I realized that all these constitutions have been drafted by humans to regulate themselves, to protect themselves. That is why they are in the context of only a person. So then I find a way out by way of mandamus. And mandamus because I held that the right to life of humans is dependent on protection of natural habitats, of the ecosystems, and all these living beings. And it is the state's responsibility. So once I held that each one of those 900 non-human species in Marghazar Zoo, when I recognized their rights, then I issued a writ to the government to shift them to sanctuaries. Now there was a very great difficulty, and the difficulty was how to implement the judgment. The government was resisting it, and there was also an ego problem. They said, I mean, what would the world say? They can't look after the animals. I said, that's not the question. Now, I had to implement my judgment. There was a very good offer that the sanctuary in Cambodia was prepared to take Kavan the elephant. So how to move him there? Even the contempt would not work because it was a very, very costly affair. So I was very, very fortunate, the court was very fortunate that the famous singer, Cher, she got attracted. And she flew to Islamabad. And that is what solved my problems. The government succumbed, and the government itself started taking credit for it. I said, please do take credit, but have my judgment implemented.
I think everybody in this room...
It has never happened that anywhere in any jurisdiction that the rights of non-human animals are recognized. A zoo is shut and the 900 inmates are all shifted to their sanctuaries or freed. It only happened in Pakistan.
Absolutely. And I think this is such an interesting story, and I wanted everybody to learn about it. What the members of the audience might not know is that this particular decision is now taught across universities and in almost every animal rights and animal law class, and that goes to show the step you took, the progressive nature of your decision, which we don't see every day. Like you said, we don't respect humans, and you were able to get your judgment implemented. Fantabulous. Now I think I want to segue back into the topic of the day. And you've joined the judiciary, you come to the bench, and now there is, because the Islamabad High Court, where Justice Minallah was a judge, is a constitutional post, you are the protector of the Constitution. So how did you view your role as a judge when you first started?
I think for a judge, the starting point or the commitment is the oath that we take before we enter upon the office. That's a commitment to the people, and that is a commitment made to Allah. And that the wordings of each word of that oath has a sanctity. And that is the guarantee for independence of the judiciary and for being an independent judge. If you take an oath that you would fiercely adjudicate whatever matter comes before you, and that you would not favor anyone, you would not fear anyone, and that you will defend, uphold, and protect the Constitution, that is it. Now, depends, you see, everyone takes oath. How an oath is violated, for me, it is inconceivable. But yes, oaths are violated. Every bureaucrat takes an oath. The armed forces take oath. The judges take oath. If only the oath was upheld and there was commitment with every word of the oath, the judiciary would be independent. There is no doubt about it.
Absolutely. But we've seen from your elephant example that it is so difficult for judgments to get implemented in Pakistan. So as a judge, how would you view your role in upholding the rule of law? Because I think an element of the rule of law is also implementation.
Well, I've served 4 years as the Chief Justice of the High Court, and then for 5 years as a judge. I've never experienced that any authority has even attempted not to implement my judgment. This was a different case because it was a complex case, and animals, you see, in any case, they are not valued the way the humans are valued. And then you see the cost was involved and the court couldn't afford the cost. And if the government had said that, sorry, we don't have the money, I mean, it would have been very difficult, but otherwise, it all depends on the judge, you see, his conduct as a judge throughout his career. That is what, I mean, if people have confidence in a judge, and if the authorities know that the judge does not tolerate things that are not legal, they don't even attempt to violate the judgment or refuse the judgment to be implemented, because then the judge knows how to have his judgment implemented. If a judge cannot implement the judgment, that is probably undermining the independence of judiciary and rule of law. Every judgment has to be implemented, and it is the duty of the judge to have the judgments implemented. Otherwise, the authority of judiciary as an institution is eroded.
Absolutely. But there's also an element there of the judgment being worth implementation. The Supreme Court of Pakistan has upheld martial laws, and those judgments were implemented. So could you speak to that a little bit, that when it comes to the rule of law, what is the Supreme Court's role?
Well, I mean, this is a very unflattering issue, you see, but
You're welcome.
we cannot erase the facts from history books. Yes, the Supreme Court's role has been what it should not have been. The Supreme Court has no authority to legitimize any unconstitutional act, let alone abrogation of the Constitution. The Supreme Court is the creation of the Constitution itself. And when the Constitution is violated, and if the Supreme Court fails in its obligation to protect and defend the Constitution, in my opinion, the judges are committing misconduct and they must be proceeded against. So it is not a question of legitimizing martial laws and implementing that judgment. The martial law is already implemented. The Supreme Court merely stamps it. It gives it, purportedly gives it legitimacy, which in my opinion, it cannot.
I think that also has parallels to a current decision in the United States Supreme Court regarding presidential immunity, and I know you're aware of it. What lessons can the rest of the world learn from Pakistan's experience when it comes to presidents who overstepped their bounds or committed acts whilst they were president?
You see, firstly, our constitution is a parliamentary democracy-based constitution. So the president is merely a figurehead. He doesn't have any power. So the only immunity is immunity that has been given to the president. So I'm of the view that it is not very significant. But in my opinion, a prime minister was dismissed from his office, an elected prime minister, because he took the plea that there was a presidential immunity. Yes, the presidential immunity was there. And the Supreme Court, in my opinion, with great respect to the Supreme Court, could not have removed and dismissed or unseated the elected prime minister on that ground. So immunity is not there as far as the prime minister is concerned, who has the powers as an elected prime minister. But as far as the judgment is concerned, I think I wouldn't like to comment on that because the chief judge is also here. I leave this to the chief judge, you see. I would be more concerned about my Pakistan, you see, and its constitution.
I had to give it a shot. But so let's move back to Pakistan then. Let's now squarely focus in on judicial independence and judges. What role do you think the appointment of judges plays in a judge being independent when he does take office?
Well, you see, again, we have a very unflattering past as far as appointment of judges, and the process of appointment of judges is also concerned. I don't know how many of you are aware of this because their number of distinguished guests seem to be from Pakistan as well. During Ayub Khan's authoritarian rule, the High Court judges, which was a constitutional court, their appointment was subject to being interviewed by the uniformed ruler, General Muhammad Ayub Khan. So one can imagine the independence of those judges, you see. I mean, a judge who consents to become a judge after being interviewed by a person in uniform who is only trained in the art of warfare and who has an authoritarian rule, I'm afraid it speaks volumes for the independence of judiciary. So we started from there. And then the only good thing that has happened in Pakistan was the 18th Amendment. And the 18th Amendment has caused a lot of political instability because 18th Amendment shook the status quo. It took away powers from the de facto rulers. And the 18th Amendment, I must say, the credit goes to that parliament which passed the 18th Amendment. And for the first time in the 18th Amendment, the process, a transparent process, an accountable process of appointment was judges also included. But unfortunately, and with great respect, the Supreme Court, headed by Chief Justice Iftikhar Muhammad Chaudhry, thought that that was in violation of the principle of independence of judiciary. in my recent dissenting judgment, I've taken a different view. And that was the time when the Supreme Court, after being restored, after that heroic struggle by the people and lawyers of Pakistan, was about to undo and strike down that 18th Amendment. But in the end, the Parliament was virtually forced to pass the 19th Amendment. And after that, the Supreme Court bench virtually made that 19th Amendment redundant as well. And again, I would say that it was not fair to those 90 people who were martyred, and who had laid down their lives, and those young, imbued, idealist youth who had struggled for democracy and supremacy of the Constitution. Yes, the process has to be very, very transparent. But let me share with you, when I became the Chief Justice, there were only 3 judges at that time in the High Court. And the image of the High Court was not what it was now, or what happened after a few years. They thought that it was a High Court which should be shut. But when I became the Chief Justice, I knew that a High Court is known by its independent judges. And independent judges, that ensures independence of that court. So it was a task for me. I had my own way of doing it. I did headhunting. And the difficulty was that the people that I selected, and Chief Judge, let me share with you, the concept of independence of judiciary in a society which has established democracy and a society which has a regime that is either hybrid in nature or authoritarian. The concept of independence of judiciary is very different in those societies. In a society where the rule of law and democracy are weak, in those societies you need judges who are not only competent, who do not only have integrity, but they are fearless as well. So the difficulty was how to find these judges. So the judges that I identified, the difficulty then was they were not willing to become judges because they were so independent. They were, their practices, you see, they were making a lot of money. So how to convince them? In one case, it took me 3 years only to convince him. The other, I took 2 years to convince him. Now let me share something with you as well. When their names were recommended for elevation to the Judicial Commission, though no one doubted their integrity, no one doubted their competence, but because of their fearlessness and because of their progressive thoughts, the system started resisting. And there was such a resistance that even the then elected Prime Minister attempted to resist those appointments, not realizing that every prime minister who is in office forgets that one day he would be out of office and would require independent judiciary and independent judges. As long as they are in office, they forget this. But when they are on the wrong side of the powers, then they realize how important it is to have independent judges. So I can say with confidence that the judges elevated to the Islamabad High Court, only time will tell. The Chief Judge mentioned about the 6 judges who had written the letter. 5 out of them were identified, headhunted, and recommended by me.
I would love to go on and on, but Mohammed just told me we don't really have that much time. And you've already touched upon a lot of the topics in terms of being forward-looking and what a judge needs to have in order to be judicially independent. So I want to give the audience some time for questions, but from my side, it has been an honor to be able to have this conversation with you. Can I see, are there any questions? The lady in the back.
They can't hear her.
Okay.
Why don't you come here? Probably everyone can hear you then.
Listen.
Good evening. It's really an honor to have you here with us tonight. And my name is Amara Farooq, and I do have 3 questions, but courtesy to everyone else, I'll just stick to 1 question. And if we have time, I'll get back to you. So my first question is 2-pronged question. And it's about, given your extensive experience in judicial system of Pakistan, what were some of the challenges and fears that you and your family personally faced with respect to security, and how did you tackle? Okay, I'm gonna sit, so if you don't mind. Go ahead. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. So my first question is a 2-pronged question. Given your experience, extensive and courageous experience in judicial system of Pakistan, what were some of the challenges and fears that you and your family has faced personally with respect to security, making decisions, and how did you tackle them? And second prong of that question is that what is your cautionary advice to a young Pakistani-American attorney who wants to contribute and become part of Pakistan judicial system?
This is very interesting. Interesting because you see, I think for a Pakistani judge, there are challenges, yes, but a judge is blessed when the family supports him. So I can only share with you that I've been dealing, or I've dealt with, and probably, I don't know why, in Islamabad High Court, there were so many politically consequential cases since 2017. And for some odd reason, I dealt with most of them. Now that was the time, which was a very difficult time for a High Court judge. A High Court judge would never know of any pressure if he does not give access to those who can influence him or her. So yes, I didn't know about any pressures. But when you talk about independence of judiciary, we have always focused on insulating the judiciary from the other branches of the state. There are two other very important aspects, and that is internal independence and the institutional independence. When the Supreme Court is seen as complicit, the challenge for a High Court judge is far more greater. So when in 2018, at that time, there was another political party and another political leadership who were on the wrong side of the powerful de facto rulers. So I didn't get any pressure from outside. But if you don't give access, then attempts are made to discredit you on the social media, by using the social media, and in a very organized way. I mean, when I suspended those three sentences, I mean, my family was literally in tears. My siblings' photographs, our privacy was encroached, and then my integrity was attacked. And people, probably many of you sitting here would have believed the way they propagated that I got 2 flats in bribe. I was with the Supreme Court judge in a car. We took a photograph. That went viral. And it had a caption down there mentioning me with the president of a political parties in London. But I had my duty. I was committed to my oath. And that propaganda was so strong that even those who were very close to me started believing that probably I might have got those 2 flats. I also started doubting myself. I said, maybe. You see, because it was so strong. Then my wife, my siblings would get telephone calls from those who knew us, saying that we never knew that your brother or your husband was like this. Yes, those are challenges. Only recently, I wrote a note. The personal data of my 2 sons was put on the social media and obtained from a government organization. My wife, who has nothing to do with politics, and they had made up a documentary. Yes, those are challenges. But that is a test of a judge. That is a test of a judge's independence. But the wonderful thing is that those who used to propagate against me till 2022, things all of a sudden changed. They came on this side of the rostrum, and the other side was then on this side. Today, there is a different propaganda from those who benefited from Islamabad High Court when no other high court was giving relief. But that again is a test of a judge. That determines the people's confidence in a judge or a court. And a judge must not be afraid of criticism. Yes, it hurts when the integrity is doubted or aspersions are cast on the integrity. It does hurt. When I was leaving, I was told about this August gathering. I mean, so many things were said, but I've always believed in one thing. It is the truth that always comes out and always prevails. A judge has taken an oath. He or she must be prepared for these challenges. Yes, momentarily, it affects the family members. It does. But then, if they are supportive, that is the greatest blessing of a judge. I hope that answers my question.
Okay, thank you very much.
I can only take one more question.
Yes, thank you very much. We really appreciate Honorable.
Well, you had a mic all the time.
Yeah. Honorable Judge's time. We really honor and appreciate your judgment to strengthen the Constitution and democracy in Pakistan. But my question is, your Honorable Court opened the your court on 9th of April very late. Can you answer why? And there are petitions of Ashad Sharif in Supreme Court of his gruesome killing, and the ex-Prime Minister of Pakistan, Imran Khan, is asking Judicial Commission on 9th. Why the Supreme Court is not listening those petitions? Can you explain to us, please? Thank you.
You have asked me this question about opening the court at night. Midnight.
Yes.
Right? It is a political narrative. I know about that. But what do you know about the Islamabad High Court? The day I took over, the next day, what was the first circular that was issued by me? Do you know that?
Somehow, yes, I read about that in Dawn.
What is that circular? I want to know from you. You believed the political narrative, but you never, you see, you also doubted my integrity by believing a narrative without knowing the facts. So let me tell you, and probably it's an opportunity to tell you and tell all those who have believed in this false narrative. And no other high court has ever done that. The day I took over, the next day I issued and that is on record. I believed that Islamabad High Court was a constitutional court, and it was its duty to remain open for 24 hours. But in the same circular, I had prescribed the procedure that anyone, no matter what time, wants to file a petition, would call the number, that petition would come to me. If the High Court would always open, the lights would open, because the staff would go to attend to that matter, whether that was 3 a.m., that was 4 a.m. And that circular is still on record. 1,400 people benefited from that circular. Nobody knows about them because they were not political people. They were ordinary poor people. And only the Islamabad High Court did that during the 4 years that I was the Chief Justice. There were petitions of enforced disappearances received late in the evening at night. And one was that of Matiullah Jan, a journalist. I received that late in the evening. The High Court was open for everyone. Now, what happened that night? Did I come to the High Court? You tell me, you asked me this question, did I come to the High Court?
I think so, yes.
You think so? And how did you get this information? And let me now inform you. I was at home. I was informed that there was a situation and people want to file petitions. And then they informed me that the Supreme Court Bar Association President, Mr. S.N. Boone, has requested to file a petition. So I said, take all the petitions, send to me if they are necessary. They would WhatsApp those petitions to me. If they were necessary, I would have passed an order. Did I pass an order? So what? Who wanted to do something very unconstitutional or illegal that they got so afraid that only lights were lit? Again, now I tell you something very interesting. I was in my pajamas, and I didn't know, you see, because the staff, it was their duty to go to the High Court to receive. I saw the petitions, they were frivolous petitions. I didn't pass any order. If I had to stop someone and I didn't go to the High Court at all, I was in my pajamas and I was taking out something from the fridge. And my wife said, oh, come, see what ARY is saying. They are lamenting that why did he reach the High Court? I said, really? But now I tell you, firstly, you all believed it. Had I passed any order, then probably you may have been right. But you did not even inquire. That happened in 2021. Since 2018, 1,400 petitions were entertained by me at night, in the evening, or after the office hours. And yet, a political narrative was made that why the court was open. So now let me tell you something. What were the television stations saying? Though at that time I didn't realize it. I was watching ARY in my pajamas. I didn't even bother to change, because I didn't have to go. I didn't have to pass any order. So the ARY, you see, I don't want to name them, they created a situation as if martial law is going to be imposed. I wish every time there is a threat of martial law, the courts remain open. I wish they were open on 5th of July when General Ziaul Haq was removing an elected prime minister. I wish they were open on 12th of October when General Pervez Musharraf had thrown out an elected prime minister. If anyone had attempted to remove unconstitutionally an elected prime minister till then, Mr. Imran Khan, then it would have been a test of the Islamabad High Court whether it stands up to uphold the Constitution or not.
Thank you, Justice Minallah. I can't take any more questions. Okay. I'll let the president take it. Okay.
All right. Well, I don't think we can entertain all of the questions tonight. We're gonna have a reception. We're gonna. I'm sorry. We're gonna have to continue this conversation elsewhere. We're gonna have a reception outside in the hall in the area right adjacent to the Great Hall. Thank you for coming, everyone, and have a great evening.